I'm taking on a persona of someone from ancient Hebrew history, and I have a shawl to help me with this persona. If I can get it on straight. All right, can you see it? I'm taking on the persona of a person in ancient Hebrew land, and I'm going to call myself Ezra. So I invite you to come along with me on this journey. Nearly 600 years before Jesus was born. For as long as we can remember, troops from surrounding nations all over the Middle East would tramp through our land and make trouble. They were on their way to some place to make war, and there was bad blood among the nations all around us. And tiny Israel would be caught in the middle every time. But this time, instead of their just tramping through, the Babylonians came and they didn't go away. They stayed. Something was happening and we didn't know what it was, but we were afraid. And before long, it was clear what was happening. We were forced into detention. The question, will they kill us? No, but in short hour, we found out what was happening. We were going to be refugees by force, and we'd be headed for Babylonia. So what happened is that their leaders rounded us up, and the strongest people and the leaders of Israel, the strongest people were taken on this journey, and we left behind the poor people, sick people, little children to care for themselves and probably to die. Well, the Babylonian troops, as we were leaving, they went to our temple and they sacked our most important treasures, the precious things for generations. Now, Babylonia is a long way from Jerusalem. It's the place where we now call Iraq. On the way, the Babylonian troops rode horses. We walked. We walked almost 1,700 miles to Babylonia. Many of us died on the way. It was a hopeless situation for us, and there was crying and shouting, cursing. People were stumbling down on the ground. Some were even making plans to escape. Over and over, we asked ourselves the question, why Israel? What had we ever done to be treated like this? And we found ourselves arguing back and forth among ourselves. And there were mean-spirited ones, the goody-goody ones, that accused the rest of us that this is God's punishment for you who aren't religious enough. You who don't restrict all the commandments in every detail. And some of us, the more holy among us, even promised that we would banish the others to die in the desert. Maybe God then would reconsider and let us go back to our homes free. So the arguments went on and on day by day Underneath, we would say, why, oh, why is it that this thing is happening to us? It's a long, long walk to Babylonia. We lost our sense of time completely, but we were a broken people. We didn't even trust each other. We had been a proud people, God's chosen people. All of that was gone. And someone wants me very much, and we're going to shut him up. We were broken people. We didn't trust each other. We'd been proud. We'd been God's people, and all of that was gone. Hopelessness. And once we got to Babylon, after who knows how long, the people there just glared at us. We became a curiosity. We were free to move around, not quite prisoners, and yet the outsiders, they didn't want us there. One day, we were so sad and broken that we sat down along the Euphrates River and we just wept over our plight, overwhelmed with grief. And some of the rude Babylonians came over to us and they prodded us saying, "Hey, you, sing some of the songs of Zion for us." And we told them, "We've hung up our harps on the trees. How can we sing God's songs in a foreign land?" What an insult. That was what it was like. We were given little houses, little parcels of land to live on. And some of us were given important jobs to do. Others of us worked in the quarries. We cut down trees. We worked on roads. And even though we were kept busy, we were still overtaken with this sense of being utterly lost and uprooted from everything that we'd known back in our homes. We were no longer a people of covenant with God. But in time, our spiritual leaders called us all together. They had channeled God, and they spoke these words from Yahweh, who said, "Wash and mend up your dirty clothes. They're ragged. Start looking presentable. Stop the crying and the wailing. Tidy up your houses. Sweep the walkways. And plant some flowers near the doors of your houses. Pick up the trash. Fig and pomegranate trees grow well here in this land. You should ask Joan to help you compost and make some good gardens. Introduce yourself to your Babylonian neighbors. Reach out. It's hard to do, but reach out and invite them over. Welcome them as God has always welcomed you. And you might talk about sharing some projects as neighbors. Maybe set up some beehives. Maybe you could find some space and make a small vineyard together. Because if you do, you'll find that working together will reduce some of the suspicion that you have, you of the people from Babylonia, and they of you. And he went on, resume your daily prayers and your rituals. Teach the commandments to your children. Tell them the story of our ancestors and of the homeland that we left behind. Show your Babylonian neighbors that you're people of hope, You're people of hope, that you trust God for your future. Well, these were the words from Yahweh, and we did what we were asked to do. At first, our Babylonian neighbors were shocked and then puzzled. But then they started to talk with us, and we felt more welcome. Life was a little better. But this place was not our home. Time passed, and babies were being born. Elders died. 3 years went by, then 5, 10, 40, 60, 70 years. And no one was alive when Israel was taken by force from our own land. But we did what was expected of us in Babylonia, but inside we felt abandoned and without hope. 70 years passed since our capture to the Holy Land. Apparently there was something going on, like politics in the whole region within Babylonia, and politics had changed some things, and we didn't know all about it, what was going on. But one day, the Babylonian king just announced that we were captives, free to go back to the homeland. Now here is a point where I'm going to set my Ezra rule beside. There are some things mentioning, particularly as they relate to hope. It's important for us to remember that the Hebrew people throughout generations had taught their tribal history. They had taught the story to their children. I think history has always been important to the people of the Holy Land to this very day. Keeping that tribal story and remembering everything that had happened throughout history was a way of providing a certain rootage for people. They told the good stories and they told the bad ones. They told of their hopes under pressure. They told even the mistakes that they had made through the centuries and the consequences that came from those mistakes. They didn't play up just the good parts and downplay the bad parts of the stories. They were passionate and complete in telling the stories of their people. And they were taught to respect that story and what it meant, and to never, ever forget where they came from. And doing that was critically important to the children growing up under the pressure of being in a foreign land. And it was also important for their whole nation. You know, I grew up with both my parents, and yet I don't know anything about my father's side of the family, anything about the adventure. He wouldn't say anything about it. And that wasn't good for me. And it wasn't good for him either. But the Hebrew people in their heritage knew that they would show their heritage and pass it on to the generation, because having hope when hope seems hopeless is a very different thing when there's a whole story to be told that helps to provide some perspective about what was going on right then. Without perspective, there is a lack of wisdom and resilience for those troubled times. I'm thinking today of our own country. As Americans, we haven't done as well sharing our story with our children. And I encourage us to begin to think of a new way to teach our children and maybe the grandchildren, because they're a little more open to it, perhaps. Teach them who we are as a people, even when they don't care very much about hearing about it. Be honest with the story, teach the children, share the story of how it's shaped our lives to now. And let's insist that that story is taught honestly, not embellished or cut the crucial things out. Let's remember that telling the story saved the Jews in Babylonia and even earlier in Egypt. Save the story, tell it again. It also helped to tell the story to this day of the Holocaust, not to lose who we are as a people. And it's clear to me that we who are not of the Jewish heritage need to do the very same thing, and to do it in our family. And to frankly ask educators what values and what bias is going into teaching American history. And to ask those questions in our schools and our community, believing that truth, when it's taught honestly and compassion, can turn a troubled rabble of a people into a people of covenant. I'm convinced that we need to tell our stories as Americans and do it with integrity, important, probably now better than any other time. And it occurs to me that it might be something that even your church could advocate for in your community. What is our real story? Take away the myths, tell the story so that we know where we've come from. But if you do that, be prepared, because telling the truth may not be popular. Well, the Hebrews who left Babylon still had a lot to learn. Oh, they've been taught about the great walls around Jerusalem. They've been told about the exile to Egypt for years and years, and that magnificent temple in Jerusalem which they left behind. They knew the stories about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, Miriam and Moses and Queen Esther were actually a part of their family history. And now, as they left Babylonian and they looked forward to reconnecting with the people of their heritage and their land, when they got back to Jerusalem, they knew that they would be a people again. And they found some hope in their spiritual leaders who channeled God, saying, "Comfort, comfort my people. I'm going to lead you back home, and I'm going to see that the deep valleys along the way aren't too deep for you. I'm going to make sure that the mountains along the way are easier for you to cross. I'll keep you strong. Why, you will travel like eagles flying. You will be strong. Women who are pregnant and can hardly walk on this journey back, I'll carry them with my own arms. You're going to be able to run and not be weary. You're going to be able to walk on this journey and not faint or fall. Well, they made good time. You see, the past had made them resilient, and they became a gay, hopeful people. Jerusalem, the city just lay just ahead. And they looked out on the horizon toward it, and they moved closer. And they said, surely this isn't the Jerusalem of our ancestors. Where's the temple? Where are the fig trees and the olive groves? Where are the vineyards? And they found that in place where the temple stood, there were only huge stones, broken, dead grass everywhere. Generations of war between differing nations had utterly destroyed the glory of their past, and their land was barren. There were some people there, but few in number, and they were the poorest. They were trying to eke out a little food and shelter. They knew nothing of the glory that had been Israel. Was this some cruel joke from God? Had they been taught lies back in Babylonia about this great history of who they were? Shock and deep, deep hopelessness sunk in again. And it took time, a long time, for they began to remember their tribal story, which went back to creation itself. And it was two men, Ezra and Nehemiah, who called them to remember that they were a people of hope, even in disastrous circumstances. And little by little, they began to believe the words, we can build it better. And they did. They rebuilded it better. I'm making a tie to the story of today, this first day of Advent. In Christian tradition, it symbolizes the hope that comes from the birth of a child who will lead us into new ways of faith and hope. In lighting the hope candle, let's not just see the pretty light, but to remember that having hope isn't passive. Hope is about doing something about the despair and the trouble. I imagine most of you are hoping that the recent election is a sign of hope. We're encouraged that a vaccine is near. But let's remember, let's not forget that there are millions of people who don't see the results of the election as grounds for hope. And we're apt to feel paralyzed, not even knowing how to talk or listen or find common grounds with even people in our own families. Telling African Americans that Black Lives Matter means that there is hope, when all know that despite the progress that we've been making, there are still generations for Black Lives Matter to really happen. Telling poor people without enough food to share, because they've been told that there'll be turkey on Thanksgiving and Christmas. That's not enough. telling people whose homes have been burned out that everything's going to be okay, that they'll find hope again. That's pretty difficult to accept. And yet, let us hope when hope seems hopeless. Remembering that having hope is not a passive sentiment and a pretty candle, but that hope is really validated by action that we take. Like the captives in Babylonia who followed the word of God, wash your clothes, mend them, look respectable, stop the crying, the wailing, plant some flowers on the walkways, and reach out to your Babylonian neighbors, hoping that maybe together you can do some things like set up a beehive or plant a fig tree that might bear some hope. And doing these kinds of things collectively as a people can make us hopeful in a time of trouble. And I'm sure, I don't know what your story is, your own personal story, the things you'd hoped for and just haven't happened, where there is grief, where there are things you can't even talk about, even in community of faith, hurts that won't go away. Believe in hope. And to do that is not passive. To just stand by and let it go, let it pass, something to bear. But hope is being active, doing something, anything that can be done to make the hope more hopeful. Well, this is a time to us to help turn the angry people in our land, our families, into a people, into really a people again, and to make each of us more open to participate in that being a new people. So you see, the story goes on. It hasn't been finished yet. And so may this Advent be a way of moving beyond the sentiment and the pretty lights and candles, beyond the sentiments, and to be able to take, as people of hope, courageous action to make it real. So my wish for you and for me is that we may make it so, and amen.